Hello everyone and welcome to the new session of the lecture series, and today's topic is plant growth and development. So this lecture is completely NCERT based, means all the topics in this lecture are from the NCERT book. Now let's start with the definition of the growth. Let's understand what is growth. Okay, so growth is the most fundamental, and conspicuous characteristic of a living being or living organism. Okay, so how can growth be defined? Growth is a irreversible, you have to remember that it is an irreversible and permanent increase, in the either the size of the organism, or its part, or even an individual cell. So here you can see growth can be measured, as an increase in size of the organ or a part of an organ, or even an increase in the size of the individual cell. This is also defined as growth, and it is an irreversible and a permanent change. All right. Now, usually growth is accompanied by lot of metabolic processes, or you can say lot of biochemical pathways are going on. And what is metabolism? Metabolism consists of both anabolic pathway and catabolic pathway. So growth involves both anabolic pathway and catabolic pathway. So what will anabolic pathway lead to? This anabolic pathway, will lead to the formation of, or you can say synthesis of, biomolecules. All right. And these biomolecules are required for the growth. Now, let's talk about catabolic pathway. So catabolic pathway, what happens? Complex molecules are broken down into simpler one, and there is release of energy. And this energy is used, for carrying out various cellular processes. Various cellular processes, such as active transport, active transport, and we have signaling. All right, and energy is also used in what? In movement. And then we have reproduction also. All right. So growth is a metabolic process, that occurs at the expense of energy. All right. One of the example of growth, a simple example we can take, is the expansion of leaf. Expansion of leaf, which can be expansion of either the surface area of the leaf. This is also known as growth if there is increase in surface area, if there is increase in number of cells. This is also known as growth. If there is elongation of the cell, then also we can call it as growth. So growth can be measured in lot of ways. Now let's talk about the indeterminate growth. Usually in plants, indeterminate growth is seen. Now this indeterminate growth is also known as open growth. And in this growth, what happens? In this type of growth, the growth is not terminated. And what happens? The main axis, or you can say stem, it continues to grow. Okay, it continues to grow. Okay, so what happened again in open growth? The open growth, okay, is characterized by the existence of the meristem. Okay, you have to remember this. Indeterminate growth is because of the presence of meristem in specific regions of the plant. All right. Now, what are these meristem? These meristem contain cells, okay, which are meristematic cells, and they have the ability to divide. They keep on dividing. All right. If there is one cell, it will form two cells. Again, these cells can divide. Okay. So they keep on dividing, and they can also perpetuate themselves. Perpetuate means they can expand themselves, or you can say they can spread. All right. So in short, you can say indeterminate growth, okay, is because of the presence of meristem in specific region of the plants, okay, and these meristem contains cells that have the ability to continuously divide and perpetuate themselves. So here in this figure, you can see the root and the shoot apical meristem. So shoot apical meristem is present here, okay, and it helps in the growth of the shoot. All right, this is the shoot, okay, this is the vascular cambium here. Then we have the root, okay, so root apical meristem is present, okay, at the base of the root. You can say at the base of the root. All right, or you can also say tip of the root. Okay, and these regions, these meristem contain what? They contain meristematic cells. And these meristematic cells, they keep on dividing, and they keep on spreading and expanding. All right. Now let's talk about the types of growth. Now growth can be first primary growth, and then later we have the secondary growth. Now let's see the difference between them. Now the primary growth contribute to the elongation of the plant along their axis. Means it helps in the longitudinal growth. Okay, like this way, like stem also grows longitudinally. And what does this primary growth do? They help in the elongation of the plant. Okay, or you can say elongation of the main axis. And what is main axis? Stem. All right. So primary growth helps in the elongation. Now, what does secondary growth do? Secondary growth help to increase the girth of the organs or the okay, girth. Now, what is girth? Girth is the width, you can say. So it helps to increase the width as well as you can say thickness of the plant. All right, or you can say it helps to increase the diameter. All right, so this growth is lateral, okay, this way. Okay, so that's why there is an increase in the width. All right, now primary growth is universal, means it is seen in all the plants, whereas secondary growth, okay, you have to remember this, is seen in dicots and gymnosperms. All right, this you have to remember. Secondary growth is only seen in dicots and gymnosperm, whereas secondary growth is absent in monocots. Absent in monocots. Now, some of the example of primary growth. Okay, some of the areas or you can say region where primary growth take place are shoot apical meristem and root apical meristem. We have already discussed about this. Now, secondary growth, where does it take place? It takes place in lateral meristems. Okay, an example of lateral meristems are vascular cambium and cork cambium. Okay, so briefly, I will tell you what is vascular cambium and cork cambium. So, vascular cambium, okay, it is a type of secondary meristem. It is also known as secondary meristem. Alright, or you can say lateral meristem is also known as secondary meristem. And what is the role of vascular cambium? Vascular cambium helps to add phloem and xylem. In the later stages, secondary phloem and secondary xylem. Alright. And cork cambium. What is the role of cork cambium? Cork cambium, okay, again it is known as secondary meristem. And what does it do? It forms some of the region of the bark, okay, which is known as cork, okay, forms a region in a bark. Bark has many regions. One of the region is formed by cork cambium in bark of the stem. Alright, so this was about primary growth and secondary growth. Now, how growth can be measured? Okay, let's talk about the measurement of the growth. Now, growth, as I've already told you, can be measured in lot of ways. Okay, there are variety of parameters, okay, to measure growth. First one is fresh and dry weight of the plant. What is fresh weight? Fresh weight is the weight which contains the moisture, okay, or you can say some water. And if we dry the plant, okay, then we have the dry weight without moisture. The next parameter can be length of the plant, or you can say length of any organ or its part, okay. And then we next parameter is the area. We can say increase in the area. Next can be increase in the volume, and then we have increase in the cell number, okay. So growth can be measured in lot of ways. First can be the increase, or you can say change in the weight, fresh and dry weight, increase in length, okay, increase in area, increase in volume, and number of cells. Now again, these are some of the examples, okay. Now again, growth can be expressed as, we have already discussed, increase in cell number. One of the example is one single maize, okay, in the maize root apical meristem, okay. They are talking about root apical meristem, which is denoted as this, root apical meristem. One single root apical meristem in maize can give rise to 70,500 new cells per hour, okay. So this is also considered as growth. So we can say growth is occurring here, alright, if there is an increase in the cell number. This contributes to growth. What type of growth? Growth of roots. Now, second is the increase in the size of the cell. Okay. Now, example can be watermelon. The cells in a watermelon may increase in size up to 350,000 times. Okay, so this is an example of increase in size of the cell. All right, or you can say there is elongation of the cell. And what happens during elongation? There is cell wall deposition. All right, new material is deposited in the cell wall. Okay, so there are changes in the material which is added to the cell wall. And how does it happen? If this is the initial cell wall, material is added inside to the inner side. Okay, here the new cell wall material is added towards the inside. Okay, towards inside. Okay, now again next example is increase in the length. So increase in the length can be of the entire plant, you can say, or you can say some organ. Okay, or you can also take an example of growth of the pollen. Okay, a pollen give rise to the pollen tube first, okay, which carries 2 male gametes. So if this is the pollen, okay, so what happens? It germinates, okay, and it gives rise to a pollen tube. And these pollen tube carries the male gametes. Okay, so this germination of the pollen tube and germination of the pollen and formation of the pollen tube is also considered as growth. Okay, this is also considered as growth. Now, next example can be increase in the surface area of the leaf. Okay, so you can say growth in a dorsiventral leaf. All right, so what is a dorsiventral leaf? Dorsiventral leaves are found in dicots. Okay, dicots leaves are known as dorsiventral leaf. Why? Because the upper part of the leaf, okay, is known as the ventral part, whereas the lower is known as the dorsal. Lower part is known as dorsal. So there is increase in the surface area of the leaf, okay, which is also considered as the growth, or we can say growth is occurring when there is increase in the surface area of the leaf. Okay, now why there is an increase in surface area? To absorb the sunlight. Okay, now let's talk about the phases of growth. All right, now the period of growth is generally divided into 3 phases. There are 3 phases of growth. First is the meristematic phase. In meristematic phase, what happens? The cells in this region are rich in protoplasm. Okay, meristematic region consists of meristematic cells which are rich in protoplasm. They have a very large nuclei. All right, and what about the cell walls? The cell walls are primary in nature. Okay, they are thin walled and cellulosic. Okay, they have cellulose. And what does the cell have? They have abundant plasmodesmatal connections. All right, plasmodesmatal connections are also known as cytoplasmic channels. Okay, so through these channels, the 2 cells are connected with each other. All right, so first is the meristematic phase, which consists of cells which are rich in protoplasm. They have a conspicuous large nuclei. Cell walls are primary and thin as well as cellulosic, and the cells contains plasmodesmata. So if this is a cell Okay, they are connected with each other through this plasmodesmata, also known as the cytoplasmic channels. Okay, so this is plasmodesmata. Okay, now next phase is the elongation phase. Okay, we have already talked about the meristematic phase. All right, now next is the elongation phase. In elongation phase, what happens? There is a increase in the number of vacuoles, increased vacuolation. Okay, next thing is happening is cell enlargement is taking place and new cell wall deposition. Okay, I've already told you what happens during cell elongation. New cell wall material is added, which leads to the enlargement of the cell. Okay, now next phase is the maturation phase. Okay, after elongation phase, we have the maturation phase. In maturation phase, what happens? The cells of this zone attain their maximal size in terms of wall thickening and protoplasmic modification. Okay, so in this region, the cells are mature now and they have attained their maximum size. Okay, and all the modification in the protoplasm is complete now. Okay, and the cell is now known as mature cells. Okay, mature cells are sometimes also known as differentiated cells. Okay, and what does they do? They have some specialized role. They have specialized role now. Okay, means they have some specific roles. Now let's talk about the growth rate. Okay, now simple definition of growth rate is the increase in growth per unit time. Whenever we talk about rate, okay, we have to consider time. So growth rate is increase in the growth per unit time. Okay, this is known as growth rate. Now the rate of growth can be expressed mathematically. Okay, how it can be expressed? It can be expressed in two ways. First is arithmetic growth rate. Second is geometric growth rate. So let's see what happens during arithmetic growth rate. This is the figure showing arithmetic growth rate. So what happens if this was two cells initially? Okay, this was one cell, this is another cell. So one of the cell will divide here. Okay, so this cell is dividing into two cells. Okay, whereas the other cell, this cell matures. Okay, means it will not divide. This cell will mature. After maturation, the cell lose the ability to divide. Okay, and what happens? This cell will divide into two, whereas this cell will mature. Okay, so one cell divide whereas the other cell matures. Okay, now again this cell will divide into two, whereas this cell again will mature, will reach maturity. Okay, and this process goes on. This is known as arithmetic growth. All right, so let's study this. After mitotic cell division, what happens? Only one daughter cell continues to divide while the other differentiate and matures. Okay, one cell give rise to two cells. Okay, this cell will mature, whereas this cell will continue to divide. Okay, one cell matures, one cell is dividing. Example, this type of growth is seen in the elongation of root. Okay, if the elongation of root is happening at a constant rate, means arithmetic growth is taking place there. All right. Now, arithmetic growth rate can be mathematically expressed as, we have this formula for arithmetic growth rate. Here is the length at time t. This is the length at time 0. Okay. And then we have r. What is r? R is the growth rate. Okay. Per elongation, or a growth rate or elongation per unit time. Okay. So this r is the growth rate per unit time, or you can say elongation per unit time. Now, on plotting the length of the organ, okay, such as root, okay, against time, okay, what is seen? A linear curve is obtained. Okay, if we plot a graph, okay, you can see this is the graph, okay, of the length of the organ against time, then a linear curve is obtained. This is a linear curve. This is the time, this is the height of the plant or the length, alright, and we can see a linear growth, a constant linear growth is observed in arithmetic growth rate. Now let's talk about the geometric growth rate. Geometric growth rate, what happens? If there was 2 cells initially, both will divide, alright. So this cell is also has divided into 2. This cell again has divided into 2. And again, this cell will again divide into 2, and it will go on and on. Alright. So following mitotic division, both the progeny cells, okay, this was the, if suppose this was the parent cell, these are the progeny cells. Alright. These progeny cells will keep on dividing. Okay. And you can take another cell here. Okay. One cell which divides into these two. So in this case, this will be parent cell. And these two will be progeny cells then. Okay. So what happens? The progeny cell retain the ability to divide and continue to do so. They keep on dividing. So now if we plot the parameter of growth, okay, against time here, what is observed? A sigmoid or S-shaped curve is observed here. Okay, so this is a sigmoid curve. This is known as sigmoid or S-shaped curve. Okay, so here the size or the weight of the organ such as root is plotted against time. Now here you can see sigmoid curve has 3 phases again. First is the lag phase, then we have the exponential phase, and then we have the stationary phase. Alright, now let's see the phases of the geometric growth. Okay, first is the lag phase. So initially what happens? During the lag phase, the growth progresses at a very slower pace. Okay, there is very slow growth here. That's why it is known as the lag phase, slow growth. Okay, then what happens during exponential phase? Exponential phase is also known as the log phase. First we have the lag and then we have the log phase. The lag phase is followed by an exponential increase in the growth. Okay, there is an exponential increase in the growth, means the growth is rapid here now. You can say rapid growth. Okay, then after exponential phase, what happens? Then we have the stationary phase. Stationary phase, what happens? The growth decelerates, means it slows down. Why? Because there is a depletion of the nutrients, or you can say there is a limited nutrients are available. So that's why growth becomes slow again here and becomes stationary later. It will become stationary later. okay, as the nutrients are depleted. So what happens during stationary phase? The growth will initially decelerate and become stationary due to the lack of availability of the nutrients. Okay, so these were the phases of the geometric growth. Now, the geometric growth can be expressed as, okay, this is the formula, W1 is equal to W0 ERT. Okay, now what is W1? Is the final size, okay, which can be either the weight, okay, it can be height, it can be number of the cells, anything, okay. What is W0? Is the initial size at the beginning of the period. What was the initial size? Okay, initial weight, initial height, initial number of cells, initial area, okay, anything. Or you can volume also, you can take into consideration. Now R is the relative growth rate. This R is the relative growth rate. We'll talk about this relative growth rate in the next session. T is the time of the growth. Okay, E is the base of natural logarithms. All right. So this was about the geometric growth rate. We'll talk about the rest of the topics in the next lecture. Thank you for listening.